Welcome to the 700 Club, a reckless tax and spending spree that could propel this country off a fiscal cliff. President Biden's budget plans would increase the national debt to a staggering $40 trillion within 10 years. So what risky move are Republicans planning to stop this massive hemorrhage? Abigail Robertson explains.
Republicans say Democrats are in a spending free-for-all and argue they'll only support raising the debt ceiling if Democrats promise major spending reforms. With the current debt closing in on $29 trillion, Republicans want to see substantial cuts in projected government spending over the next 10 years. President Biden's budget plans would take the national debt well over $40 trillion within 10 years. And Republicans warn that's dangerous.
In fact, we're playing Russian roulette with our economy by continuing to pour trillions of dollars into our economy.
The Treasury Department says they will need to take extraordinary measures to avoid defaulting before they run out of cash, likely in October or November. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi argued Republicans addressed the debt limit 3 times under President Trump with Democratic support, and accused McConnell of playing partisan games.
He's always been there to be an obstruction to a Democratic president. The full faith and credit of the United States is never to be placed in doubt.
President Joe Biden claims it's not new spending that's the problem.
The reason for the significant debt is because of their debt, their tax limit, their tax cut.
Economist Stephen Moore told CBN News' Faith Nation he believes the Democrats' proposed spending will lead us off a fiscal cliff.
And the idea that we're going to spend another $4 trillion this year, adding on to the trillions of dollars Biden and the Democrats have always added to the budget already, is really frightening to me, frankly.
And he argues the first thing Washington must do is stop the huge spending.
I can't imagine any Republican would vote for, this massive increase in our debt without, incredible spending reforms.
If Democrats don't get the support of 10 GOP senators, they could be forced to increase the debt limit alone through their upcoming budget reconciliation bill, which only needs a simple majority to pass the Senate. Reporting from Virginia, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Well, CBN chief political analyst David Brody is joining us there. David, I understand the bipartisan infrastructure bill is moving ahead, but what about the $3.5 trillion social infrastructure? Did that take a hit last night?
It did. Kyrsten Sinema, a Democrat senator from Arizona, says she is not down at all with this $3.5 trillion that the Democrats want to spend on social infrastructure. Just to kind of back everybody up, right? You've got the hard infrastructure deal. That's that $1.2 trillion bipartisan deal. And then you've got the $3.5 trillion in human infrastructure, social infrastructure, goofy infrastructure, whatever you want to call it, because we've never seen this before. But that's exactly what Democrats want to do, and they want to jam it through on budget reconciliation. And Kyrsten Sinema said, no, I'm not going to do that. Not at $3.5 trillion for sure. And so Democrats are in a tough spot right now because it's important that the hard infrastructure bill that's being negotiated right now in the Senate, in essence, kind of accompany that $3.5 trillion bill. They kind of go up together to the House at some point. That's the only way the House is going to vote for it. So it's a bit complicated. But right now, Kyrsten Sinema is against it. What does that mean? That means Democrats would come up one vote short, because remember, they would only need 50 votes under budget reconciliation to do the social infrastructure bill, Pat.
Well, David, it looks like the political deal is inflation. People are paying more for everything they have. And will they, I mean, what else would they do in terms of an election about all this massive spending?
Well, Joe Biden's poll numbers are underwater big time, only a 39% approval rating when it comes to the economy. A lot of people are concerned specifically as it relates to high prices, obviously not just gas, but food, and you just go down the supply chain, if you will. And so this is a real big problem. I think the problem here for Republicans is that as much as they want to talk about Democrats and all of their spending habits, look, the Republicans have no real moral standing to say much of anything, what Donald Trump did in 4 years in terms of increased spending, George W. Bush before him. I mean, look, the days of Ronald Reagan and this idea of federal spending run amok and deficit reduction and all that, I mean, that has gone by the wayside, Pat. I mean, if you look at the polls today, you have a majority of Americans, and this is a centrist poll, but it's also a majority of Americans, about 55% saying they want government to do more, not less. And I think that's the larger problem here, that in essence, for many people, their God has become government, not God. And I think that's where we're going in society, and that goes right to the federal spending issue. Well,
David, I appreciate it. And we look, I mean, it must be scary to think if we lose our reserve currency status, we are in a heap of hurt, aren't we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. And, of course, Janet Yellen and over at the Fed, they say that's not going to come to that as it relates to the debt ceiling. What I believe, and my sources are telling me, is that this, they always talk about the debt ceiling, right, all the time. Oh, you got to raise the debt ceiling. Then Republicans here are saying, no, we're not going to do that. But you know what? The Democrats would basically pass the debt ceiling increase as part of budget reconciliation anyhow. So you're not going to see America default at this point. And my guess is this will go into October. They'll do a 2-month extension on the debt ceiling and then eventually have a full debt ceiling increase sometime in December.
David, thank you very much. So in other news,
you bet.
What might lead to a shooting war between the United States, Russia, and China? The answer, a major cyber attack. So what's the president saying about it? CBN senior international correspondent George Thomas has that.
Pat, the president met with members of our U.S. intelligence community this week and suggested that if America were to end up in a real war, he believes it would be because of a major cyber attack. As you know, Pat, a number of recent attacks against key government agencies and critical infrastructure, such as an oil pipeline and major meatpacking plants, have shown the extent of America's cyber vulnerabilities. The president said these and other attacks reveal just how damaging cyber threats are. Take a listen.
You know, we've seen how cyber threats, including ransomware attacks, increasingly are able to cause damage and disruption in the real world. I can't guarantee this, and you're as informed as I am. But I think it's more likely we're going to end up, if we end up in a war, a real shooting war with a major power, it's going to be as a consequence of a cyber breach of great consequence. And it's increasing exponentially, the capabilities.
The president didn't say who we might go to war with, Pat, but the administration has accused Russia and China of orchestrating some of the recent attacks.
An excellent report on the vulnerability of our power grid. How exposed are we, in your opinion?
Yeah, Pat, it's a big challenge. The biggest challenge is that many of America's vulnerabilities, their vulnerabilities are very, the electricity systems weren't designed to protect against cyber threats or EMP attacks. The experts I've spoken to, Pat, say Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran all have a plan for a combined arms attack on the U.S. electric power grid as a way of winning World War III quickly and decisively, in essence, paralyzing U.S. military power so that they don't even have to do battle with our forces. One study assessed that an attack on just 9 of 2,000 transformer substations could cause a nationwide blackout lasting more than a year. And the consequences, as you can imagine, would be devastating. No running water, no lights, no electricity. In 72 hours, as emergency generators fail, there would be massive food spoilage, threatening our national food supply. We could also see paralysis of police, hospitals, emergency services, government, military. And Pat, finally, in 7 days after emergency generators run out of fuel and batteries fail, the nation's 100 nuclear power plants will go Fukushima. Pat?
Sure. Frightening. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been warning for years about this. And an interesting thing, the big transformers that can get knocked out are made, you guessed it, in China. And it would take about a year to get them. We should be stockpiling. If, the government is up there yakking away about all these minor things, and this big crisis is looming overhead, and we're not doing anything about it. It would take a little bit of money to fix it, but if we don't do it, what George said could come to pass, and don't you think that our enemies aren't aware of our vulnerabilities? Well, lawlessness is taking over the streets of America, with the city of Seattle, Washington in the bullseye over the weekend. Police departments have been sorely depleted in the wake of the, quote, defund the police debacle. Just how bad is the crisis? Gary Lane explains.
Pat, good to be with you. The nation's cities saw more than 900 shootings last week. Seattle, Washington, one of those caught in the surge. Over a devastating 3 hours on Sunday, 3 people died, 5 were injured in a series of shootings. So far this year, more than 200 residents have been killed or injured in gun violence. Seattle's mayor this week citing a depleted police force, calling out the city's council's plans to make drastic cuts in the police budget.
Over the past 17 months, the Seattle Police Department has lost 250 police officers, which is the equivalent of over 300,000 service hours. Not unexpected, losing these number of officers. When city leaders talk about cutting a department by 50%, you will lose employees.
Pat, among those 250 officers who left the force in the past year, the chief of police.
Gary, the mayor of Seattle isn't the only one speaking out. How many other city leaders are frustrated by these cuts in the police?
Well, we're starting to see it nationwide. In Chicago, the police chief there, Police Chief Brown, is blaming the courts, lenient courts, he says, for the surge in crime there. In Washington, D.C., Police Chief Conte says it's bad actors who return to the streets to commit more crimes. And then, of course, Pat, I think we're going to see this as an issue in the 2022 campaign. Already candidates in Michigan, you're seeing James Craig, the former police chief of Detroit, speaking out about crime. He's running for governor. And then in New York City, the former Guardian Angels head, Curtis Luiwa, he's running for mayor there. So we're seeing more candidates come forward, tough on crime. That'll be an issue.
Thanks, Gary. And ladies and gentlemen, believe me, they're trying to blame it on guns. It isn't guns that make the problem. It's the people that hold the guns. And the people who hold the guns will do what they need to do if they don't think there's any restraining force. And all across the country, this isn't just one city, not just Seattle, but it's city after city. Portland, Washington is a war zone because of this move to, quote, defund the police. It was insanity. Well, as they say in the Bible, we've sown the wind, now we are reaping the whirlwind.